would you take some time and ask yourself, what values do I live for? Do I know my values? Are they accidental? Are they written down? Hey, welcome again to the Oscar Amisi Weekly Leadership Podcast, where we are passionate about equipping leaders with high-capacity tools that would help them drive societal transformation. Every week, as usual, we'll be dropping a teaching on leadership, and wherever you're watching us from, would kindly ask you to like it, share it with your friends, and also help us to get to know where you're watching us from. And as I've always said, if you want to get the teachings that I'm doing in greater detail, I'd kindly ask you to visit Amazon and get my new leadership book. Seed it out, how great leaders become great leader makers. This book will help you learn how to develop people around you, learn the posture of leadership, help you to learn the greatest tools and keys that are there that will help you to become an effective leader as you embark on your leadership journey. We want to just remind us of a few things that we've talked about as we've delved on this topic of character before competence, or the art of effective leadership. We said that leadership starts from who we are. In fact, we made this statement that if you can't lead yourself, you can't lead others. Unfortunately, we have so many people who want to be leaders out there, but they've never learned how to lead themselves first. For you to lead well, for you to lead people well, learn to lead yourself first. That's why it is important for you to learn self-leadership. We said leadership is more about our person before it is about our practice. It is not so much the things that we do out there, and as important as they are, good leadership emanates from who we are. Leadership is not just the role you play, leadership is a life that you live. In fact, the good things or the interesting things that you do out there as a leader are really an outflow of who you are inside. We said, don't just spend, we learned from the analogy or the example of the iceberg. Don't just spend your time building the 10% of who you are, what everybody can see. Because what people see is your giftings. They see how you look. They see your talent. But then there's a 90% that is below the water surface that nobody can see. But interesting, you and I know it is there. And this 90% is really defines who you and I are. And that's your character. We said good leadership is built on strong, positive character. And I borrowed a statement that was made by one of my key leadership mentors, and that's Andy Stanley, who said, you can lead without integrity, but it is moral authority, it is integrity that gives you the moral authority to lead. Would you build your character? Would you build a positive character so that people can not just hear what you say, but they can see that your words back, or your actions are backing your words? And then we told us that there are three key things that we need to work on if we are to effectively lead ourselves. And I give you the first one, self-awareness. I give you the second one, self-alignment. Then I give you the third one, self-discipline. And last week we looked at self-awareness, and we said how important it is for us to get to know ourselves, for us to know our internal world, for us to intentionally do a personal analysis or assessment test so that we get to know our weaknesses and our strengths, maximize on our strengths, and then strengthen our weaknesses, and where we know we need help, bring in people alongside us who can help us. We said, if you're ignorant of yourself, you can't lead. Self-awareness helps us to not be ignorant of ourselves. And we said, there are times when you're in a leadership space and you're experiencing some challenges with the people around you. Many a times as leaders would want to blame everybody else around us. They are not cooperating, they are not listening, they are not loyal, they're not submitting. But then we forget, maybe the challenge may not even be the people we are leading. In an instance like that, the challenge could be us. When you do a self-awareness test, it helps you to know where you need help so that you can become a better a better leader. And I challenged us and I said, there are good tools out there that would help you to be more self-aware. I talked to you about the SWOT quadrant that you can use. I talked to you about the DISC profile that you can find online that you can use that would help you get to know your leadership, your personal leadership style that will make you a better leader. I want us to delve into the last two today, and that is self-alignment and self-discipline. And the key things that you need to note, all these three key things start with self, and intentionally so. Self, because it is our responsibility to lead ourselves. It is not anybody's responsibility. It is our responsibility. We are our own chief executive officers of our very lives. We need to take responsibility of our actions, take responsibility of our choices. And that's why that word self is so key. So second key thing that I want us to look at today is self-alignment. Self-alignment. And in self-alignment is where you learn to develop principles that you live by that enable you to take a moral stand, and moral stand that is consistent with your convictions in your leadership. Maybe let me say this again. Self-alignment is where you've learned to develop life principles you live by as a leader that enable you to take a moral stand that are consistent with your convictions as a leader. I normally say that you really get to a point whereby you learn to establish an inner value system that helps you make decisions. A value system that informs your decision making as a leader. Because values are our culture. Values really inform who we are and how we make decisions. Values are not just our culture, but they express our culture. When we see your values, we know the kind of person that you are. If they are not taken care of, they will eat us. I think it's Peter Drucker who said, your culture will eat and trample your vision. Eat it for breakfast. And these cultures are informed by the values that you have as a person. And many times as leaders, we work so hard to establish values for our organizations, for our churches, for our businesses, but we forget that as individuals, we also need values. I want to challenge you today that if you're going to be an effective leader who's learned how to lead themselves, would you take some time and ask yourself, what values do I live for? Do I know my values? Are they accidental? Are they written down? And I'll challenge you, come up with about 5 values. You see, when we're leading organizations, we make sure that our organizations have a vision, they have a mission, and they have values. And we even go a step further and we paste or stick those values on our walls, in our offices. But could you and I take time and ask ourselves, what are our values? And not just stick them on our walls, stick them in our hearts. Stick them wherever we can see, wherever we can remember. When I talk about values, there's a story that I like sharing. I'm part of a pastoral team in a church in East Africa. And God has blessed us, and we've been able to have a few campuses in this church. And there's a time there was an establishment that was being done around where we are, where our church is located. And there was an international contractor who was looking for space to hold his material. So one day this foreigner who had been given this big contract walks into my office and he says, would you lease us part of this facility for the next 5 years for us to be able to hold our materials, store our materials, put up some little houses for our workers? And I asked him a question, would you be paying for the leasing? And he said, no, we don't pay for the leasing. What happens is that once our lease is done, we give you back your facility, but we also leave the things and the houses that we've built. That's how we compensate you for the time that we've used your property. So told him, allow me to consult, come back in a few days. He comes back in a few days. I didn't even consult because I knew as a church we needed that piece of property for other things, and there's no way we are going to lock it and lease it to somebody for a long period. So this gentleman comes into the office and I tell him, you know what, we may not be able to lease this facility to you because we may need to use it even before that 5-year term is over. He leaves disappointed, but then he comes back after 3 days. And this time he walks into the office, he's carrying a big envelope, I think an A2 envelope, and he places it on my table and is holding papers, and he tells me, if you can get your leadership to sign off these leads on these papers, what is in this big paper bag will be yours. And he tells me what was inside the big envelope or paper bag. It was money, and he mentions the amount. And I look at him and man, I laughed. I had a good laugh. And I'll tell you why I laughed. Because one, I was broke to the bone, didn't have money. And this guy is showing me money, and I don't have money. But then I looked at him. I didn't even need to tell him, give me some time to go and pray, no. Or give me some time to go and consult, no. I looked at him and I told him, you know what? There's no way I can take that money. My answer still stands. We can't give you this. The guy was confused because he was like, I think he had met so many people who had fallen for that. People just take bribes left, right, and center. But I needed to understand the reason why I didn't take that money. It's not because I didn't need money. It's because I have values. You see, when you have values, you don't even need to go and say, you know, as a leader, I need to go and pray about this decision. No, your values guide your decision making. One of my values is integrity. And because of that value, it was very easy for me to tell him, no, I can't take that money because of the values that I hold, the values that I stand for. I need to ask you, as a leader, do you have values? Do you know your values? Have you named those values? I want to challenge you today. Write down some 5 values that would govern your decision making. Some 5 values that will tell you or inform you when to say no and when to say yes. When you do that, you'll be self-aligned. Number 2, not just self-alignment, but the self-discipline. So self-awareness, self-alignment, and self-discipline. And discipline really is where you have developed an ability to do what is right, even when you don't feel like it. And as a leader, there are so many times when we're confronted with such situations, where there are things that come your way, but because you're disciplined, you say, I will not do this, though everything in me is pushing me that direction, because then it's not the right thing. Now, interesting, I need you to understand, discipline is what holds together your value system. If you don't have discipline, you can't live out the values that you've put down. Because self-discipline will enable you to say no to something that looks so good, like the deal that was being given by this foreign gentleman. Self-discipline will say, no, I can't take it. I may be in need, but I'm not going to take it. Why? Because you have self-discipline. And I read you a scripture when we are starting this podcast on self-leadership in 1 Corinthians 9, 24 and 27. This is really the Apostle Paul. And when he speaks and writes to the Corinthians, he's bringing out some of the things that he is doing to himself so that he can be self-disciplined. And I'll remind you of that scripture. He says, do you not know that in a race all the runners run, but only one gets the prize? Then he says, run in such a way as to get the prize. You see, Paul uses the analogy of an athlete. There's no way you can be a good athlete if you're not disciplined. For you to win races, I come from a country now, and I'm so proud to say this, in Kenya, where we have some of the great long-distance runners. But I'll tell you, these men and women are so disciplined on what they eat, the time they do their practice, you know, what they take in so that doesn't mess their prowess. They are self-disciplined. Everyone who competes in the games, Paul continues to say, goes into strict training. They do it to get a crown that will not last, but we do it to get a crown that will last forever. Then he says this, and I emphasized this the last time. Therefore, I do not run like a man running aimlessly. I do not fight like a man beating the air. No, I beat my body and make it my slave, so that after I've preached to others, I myself will not be disqualified for the prize. The reason why many times we are disqualified in many things is lack of self-discipline. Paul is saying, I beat my body. 5 times he repeats that statement, I. In other words, disciplining me is my responsibility. I deny myself some stuff. I live in a certain way so that I don't want to get disqualified. If you're going to be an effective leader, if you're going to grow in self-leadership, not only are you supposed to be self-aware, self-aligned, where you come up with values that inform your decision-making, but you've got to embrace self-discipline. You know, say no to certain things. You see, self-discipline, like I said, is simply the quality that allows you as a person to do what needs to be done when it needs to be done, you know, and to say no to things that are not supposed to be done, that may affect your leadership negatively. Success in leadership often comes by simply doing what no one else is willing to do, and that is disciplining ourselves. As we bring this to a close, be self-aware, be self-aligned, be self-disciplined. I heard of a story from the great country of Germany. It said there was a man called Frederick the Great of Prussia, who was like the emperor or the king, or the chief, if you're from an African context, was walking in the outskirts of Berlin because that was his domain. And then he encountered this old man who was walking with a walking stick, in the opposite direction. And Frederick was so excited to see one of his subjects. So he dismounts from his horse, runs to this man and asks him, "Who are you? What's your name?" And the old man, clutching onto that walking stick, raises up his head and he says, "I am the king. I am a king." And Frederick, confused, is wondering, is there any other king? I thought I was the only king. Looks at the man and asks him, "You're a king. Where is your domain? Where do you rule?" And the old man looked at him and he said, "I am a king over myself." In other words, I lead me. I discipline me. I manage me. I lead myself. That's the key to effective self-leadership. You can't lead others unless you lead yourself. Let me take you back and just review for a minute as we bring this to a close. 1, you need self-awareness. There are tools that we've talked about that you've got to use that would help you to assess yourself. DISC profile, the SWOT quadrant. Number 2, you need self-alignment. I challenge you, take time as you listen to this podcast, write down at least 5 values that would inform your decision-making. Values are your non-negotiables. That doesn't matter whether the deal is too good, I can't negotiate on these values. Number 3, self-discipline. Learning to say no when you're supposed to, even when everything in you wants to do otherwise. Learning to lead yourself, to deny yourself or some stuff. As you do that as a leader, you'll be able to lead yourself. Self-awareness, self-alignment, and self-discipline. Let me ask you this question that you can process as you listen to this podcast. Are there areas in your life as a leader where you need to discipline yourself? Are there areas in your life where you need to control yourself? Write down those areas. Look for somebody that has your best interests. Let them hold you accountable as you embark on a journey of self-discipline. Let's be the best leaders that this world has ever seen. Let's be effective leaders. But first, let's learn to lead ourselves first before we rush so quickly to lead those who are out there. Again, thank you for joining us and watching my weekly leadership podcast. Like usual, every week we're dropping a new teaching. Join us again next week. And I said, if this impacts you, you like what you're watching, share it with your friends and let us know where you're watching us from. And if you want to get what I'm teaching in greater detail, again, I'm inviting you to go to Amazon, get my new leadership book, Seed It Out, How Great Leaders Become Great Leader Makers. Thank you so much. See you next week as we embark on the journey of effective leadership. God bless you.